Jesi milostivi čovekoljubiv Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems. Giants walking, angels and demons fight. Only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold. Mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold. From valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myth, mysteries and majesty.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Myths, Mysteries, and Majesty. I am the co-host, Shaun, and I'm hosting this episode live while Nico is still on vacation in Serbia. And today we have a guest that we've had before on the show, but I'm running the the episode now, so this is new. It's our friend and scholar, Amber. And we're going to be discussing some things about the wisdom of the Eastern Orthodox Church, what they've preserved from the more ancient church, and how maybe some of the more modern traditions could really learn something from looking at what it is that the Orthodox Church say about some things, and how they're different than what you may have been taught in church, and historically how they really, I think, just make more sense. But we're not going to really be going into like really deep scholarship here, but with Amber being somebody who is a little bit more broadly exposed to scholarship, being that she just graduated a couple months ago with a master's degree.
Yep.
And she herself has made the trek east to become Eastern Orthodox Christian, and has been very valuable in conversations that we've had. We really just wanted to have her come on and share her thoughts on this subject. So I am going to quit talking, and I'm going to let Amber kind of introduce herself, her channel, and then we'll start throwing it back and forth.
All right. Thank you. Yes. My name is Amber, and I run the channel When Deep Calls Deep. And we've just recently branched out into created a Facebook page for my channel, and am now on Instagram and have a go up and running Substack that I've made couple posts on, and there's another one going to be coming out in another day or two. So I'm really excited about that. and did just a lot of, now that I have time and am freed up and have the chance to be more creative and lean into a lot of that stuff that I learned, and really get into and exploring the wide open space that is Orthodoxy. I'm really excited and just really getting into enjoy. I got a couple books in several stages of development that I've been working on starting to get written, and just enjoying recovering from that process of because I will tell you this: if you are brave enough to decide to try to go to seminary, don't convert in the middle because it's a terrible idea.
I can imagine it. It would be it can be not only frustrating trying to reorient yourself to that's the title of the episode, reorientation, to reorient yourself to a new worldview, but also trying to deal with the what do you call it, the intellectual integrity of, now I'm taking up a different position than maybe I was earlier in my scholastic career. And so I can imagine that there would be some tensions, and also I know that the Eastern Orthodox Church is one of the few churches that still have a rigorous catechism process, and so I can imagine that not only took a lot of time, but probably weighed or had a significant toll, weighted toll. Whatever the idiom is, I'm using that one.
Right.
So yeah, took a toll on you emotionally and spiritually.
Well, actually, I was received into the church. It's going to be 1 year on August 15th, because that's the Feast of Dormition, and that's the day I was received last year. And then 2 weeks later started my final year, and my thesis, that was my thesis writing year. So I did all the catechism process stuff before, in the second year of seminary, and then decided to go ahead and jump in to get received into the church, and trying to be a newbie, to learn the ropes at the same time as I'm also trying to digest and break down complex Orthodox theology that's way above my head at the same time. I am surprised that I survived because it was like, having to interact with, approach Orthodox scholars and be like, I need help with this. And I got to have some amazing conversations. But they're like, oh yeah, well, just go read Saint Maximus the Confessor. And I'm like, you don't start patristics with Saint Maximus the Confessor. There's a whole line of guys that you have to read before you get to Saint Maximus. You can't just end Saint Gregory of Palamas. They're like, you need to read these two. Like, I am still struggling with Saint Athanasius. So let's just like slow down a little bit. But I had to, because of my thesis work, I had to get into that really deep stuff. So, I was just kind of like, I have no idea, but I'm pulling out just enough that I hope I understand to talk about the incarnation, which nobody understands. And I'm just like, how do I learn? So here's me, brand new, I know nothing, trying to break down and understand and get my head around tracing the path of divine condescension and divine ascension and theophanies and pre-incarnate Christ without being a heretic. And I'm just like, this is insane. And so I don't recommend it for anybody else, because by the time I got to the end of the graduation, I was just like so done. I'm like, somebody has to tell me like everything, like how to tie my shoes and everything, because I'm so exhausted. Like, I'm just done. And it was, but it was fun. It was amazing. And I really, yeah, that is not the best ideal path for your sanity nor your exhaustion level, to try to write a thesis and learn the first year of everything you need to learn coming into the Orthodox Church. So yeah, it was pretty crazy.
And I know Orthodoxy is different, obviously, than Latin Rite Catholicism, even Latin Rite when St. Thomas Aquinas was writing, that still would have been quite divergent. But I do remember a nun who was a Dominican talking about Thomas Aquinas reading the Summa, and she said something that I thought was very funny and very pertinent to what you were saying. Was I would read Thomas, and he would explain something, and it sounded like, "Oh my goodness, I finally understand it. You've explained it so well." And his next sentence would be, "And that's a heresy." Um, and so, as you were saying that, I was like, okay, I can kind of relate to that by this other story that I've heard, and also something that you said that maybe our listeners won't know is you said that you can't start with Saint
Mhm.
Maximus. You have to go back
Mhm.
earlier, and this reminded me that Orthodox theology, to my frustration, is not a systematic theology that you can just buy a book
No.
and learn everything about. Um,
No.
they have something called the phronema, right? And
Yes.
what exactly is this, and how do we understand learning about the mind of the church?
Okay, so this is one of those things that's really hard to explain because it's something you have to gain by experience. So let me back up and start with all Orthodox theology comes from Trinitarian Christology. Like we don't really even break those two apart. Everything starts with the Trinity in Christ. And we don't really have any other ology distinctions underneath that. When you're in a pure Orthodox conversation, you rarely hear words like ecclesiology, eschatology, soteriology, all those ologies. It's not a thing. You don't think that way. Everything is incarnational. So everything goes through and flows out of the Trinity, and Christ is the definition of everything because Trinitarian theology is this big fancy word that we call apophatic, which is we know what we know because we know what we don't know. And it's very much a hands-off, like I don't have to understand it. I know I can get as far as I know, but I know more about what I don't know. And then be it with the incarnation in Christ that gives us a bridge from apophatic to what's called capophatic, which is the positive things that we can know, because Christ gives us an observable interaction with the Trinity that we can observe, we can participate in, and we can understand because we can see what he did. We have records of his words. We have records of what, how he interacted with people. He became, God in the flesh, Logos. The Logos became tabernacled and became a physical interaction for us to understand God, the Trinity, because we have the incarnation. And so all of our theology is phrased and thought through that way instead of breaking it. So to start a conversation with, what do you believe about soteriology? In the Orthodox mind, we're going to look at you and go, well, what about Jesus? Because that's where it all starts, is there. So you have to really back up, and you have to, and to steal an analogy from a mutual good friend of ours, you have to think about it this way. So if I'm going to give you, Shaun, I'm going to hand you this thing, and you have no clue what this thing is, right? You have no concept, no word for it. You've never seen it before. You've never interacted with it before, right? Western mind, Western thinking, Western systematic theology is going to take this, and it's going to completely dismantle it, take it apart, and dissect it to understand the mechanics inside, define everything they can, categorize everything they can, and really try to mentally figure out all of it and try to, just they know as much as they can by breaking all of it down. And in the Eastern Phronema, we're going to take that and we're going to wander around with it until we find something else that looks like it, put it back where it belongs, and then watch what it does. And so at the end, what you end up with in the West is a dissected frog. And in the end, in the East, what you end up with is observing live frogs the way that they're meant to live. And so it's a very different approach to trying to understand something instead of breaking it down into categories. And by the end, you end up with a dead thing. But in the East, by interacting and participating with it, you end up with something that's still alive and that's interactable, and you can understand the way that frogs think and behave by just watching and participating with them. So it's a very different approach, and you end up with something that is more incarnational and participatory instead of all of this broken down, disconnected, categorized box way of trying to trying to interact with, trying to interact with God. The longer I'm Orthodox, the more this really hits home, because the longer you live it, the less that makes sense. How do I interact with, if you think about like those big shelving units that are cubes, right? Or file drawers. How do I interact with the file drawer or a box cube storage? It's all disconnected. The information's all disconnected because it's all categorized and separated by all of the ways that we break those things down, right? But when I have an incarnational living way of interacting with theology, so through our services and the way that we interact with the icons and with saints, that is very much an incarnational thing that takes me out of my head and it pulls me down into the actual real living experience of what it is. Now, I'm not saying that the Protestant world can't have an interaction with God. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the framework is so very different because our Christologies are so very different, and the way we approach it is so very different that you end up with, for at least for me and my experience, and now I get to sit in and start interacting and learning how to become what's called a catechist, somebody who teaches catechism, which is going to take a couple of years. So this is not like a couple of months and I'm ready to go kind of thing. But to sit down and listen to people's stories and where they come from and their traumas and their hurts and their questions and their objections and their hangups, and all of it comes back to the arguments for their head never really end up mattering. What ends up mattering for them is do I feel the living presence of Christ here? Can I interact with that in a living way? And how does this interact with where my pain is? How does this interact with where my brokenness is? And giving people an understanding and an interaction with an idea that you're not morally corrupt from before you were born for something you have absolutely no control over, to being you have a soul that is wounded and has a lot of injury, and you're carrying around a weight of a lot of illness inside that needs healing. And that doesn't make you, we don't think there's any bad parts. The goodness of God was never taken away from creation or humanity. The image of God was never lost. It just got covered in the junk and yuck of life. And it's generational. So generational trauma just keeps going. And we aren't done that someone stands up. Christ hasn't come back to end all that yet. So we're still living in the consequences of generations and of, millennia of this brokenness that we're under. And this in Orthodox Church and the way that we view our faith allows us to step into really understanding how the church is a hospital and gets deep down into those wounds and allows you to open those up and in the presence of Christ. And by taking the Eucharist and participating in all those things, it really, because we take it very seriously. And when like St. Athanasius says, that which is not assumed is not healed, Christ gets in the middle of those injuries and heals them from the inside out by assuming them, taking them on and going through them with us. So we have to, like I'm experiencing and a lot of the, just a lot of people that I know, you go through these phases where you have to deal with some really difficult life stuff because you have to go through it again with Christ walking with you in that to heal that. He goes through and experiences it with you because all of it gets assumed to get healed. And so it's a very different approach and a very different way to do it that becomes organic. And you just, and again, I can only speak from my own experience and the stories that I hear from my friends and the people that I'm talking to, that it changes you in ways that you don't. I have wounds that I have healed that I have never ever addressed, but it's just because of the approach of the church. And I was like, so something occurred to me the other day, and I was like, wait, I have never brought that up to anybody, not even in prayer, and it's not an issue anymore. And it was just completely, and I was shocked because it was a very deep wound. And I was like, so it's just such a different approach of the way that we said we are, Christianity is who we are, but the orthodoxy is the way that we live.
So I have multiple things that I want to go off of that. But first, I want to bring up. Let's see here. Deborah had a question. Who is Saint Thomas? Now I don't know if she's referring to Saint Thomas Aquinas, who's what I said, or if you had mentioned a Saint Thomas. I don't remember you saying Saint Thomas. I remember you
We
saying
have,
Athanasius and
yeah,
Gregory
we
of
have
Nazianzus.
we have a Saint Thomas, but Thomas Aquinas is not a saint in the Orthodox Church.
No.
So he is not my Saint Thomas. So I'm guessing that's probably a question for you, because he's not a saint for me.
Okay, so Saint Thomas Aquinas in the Roman Catholic Church in the Latin Rite was probably one of the greatest philosophers of the High Middle Ages. He came after Occam, and he was right before Scotus, and he had written the uh, Summa Theologica and the Summa Contra Gentiles, which are two theological works, one dedicated to a systematic understanding of the Christian life, and the other was basically an apologetic book on not apologetics in the way that you think of, like Alvin Plantinga and those kind of things, but more apologetic as in how do we take the Christian life and package it and explain it in a way for the pagan to understand. And he was very smart, but he was kind of spearheading a rebirth of something called nominalism, which I think is one of the bigger problems of the Western mindset. Which, for those of you who don't know, nominalism is the idea that all that exists is matter, and that the categories by which we see things are useful mental fictions that we impose upon the world in order to for our brains to be able to make sense of what's happening, but that those categories don't actually have any substance to them, so that the similarities, the common properties between two different dogs are just kind of coincidental. And so our mind tells us that those are both dogs, but there's no substantial nature underlying the fact that they're both dogs. The opposite of that is what every intelligent person, probably from the time of the beginning of philosophy and until then, had espoused, which is realism. And the only reason that I know so much about this is because Troy has poisoned me with Nathan Jacobs, and now I am so deep into that rabbit hole. But I'm a huge philosophy nerd, and I love that. But I do wonder if the reason for the deficiency in the Western thinking is because we assume, maybe because of our nominalism, maybe because of the empiricalism, that what a thing is just a summation of its constituent parts. And so you can explain what a thing is just by looking at what it's made of. And this really just breeds materialism, because you're saying the only thing that identifies what it is what it's made of. And I don't really know how, if that's true, I don't know how you don't go, well, ergo materialism, because you don't have any assumptions that are front loaded on that would allow you to divert around it at all. And I think that's why materialism is so prevalent in the West. And the third thing that I wanted to say, and you can play off of any of these, but I just want to throw these out there before I forget them, is you can see how important in the East the essence energies distinction is,
Mm-hmm.
because the entire idea of us being healed through
Mm-hmm.
the process of liturgy, through the process of receiving the Eucharist, through the process of working with the saints, is the idea of being energized. The idea that you are taking on something that, I mean, I don't know how better to say it than the whole iron in the fire analogy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you are like iron and you are being heated in a furnace, and you are taking on something that doesn't naturally belong to you, but for what you were intended for. And so you are able uh, to receive this energy, and you're able to hold this energy, and you're able to transfer it. I think, was it Paul says that we are like clay vessels that are holding like
Mm-hmm.
treasure. And I don't know what else he would be pointing to except to that idea that we are vessels for the what Peter says is participation in the divine nature. Um,
Yeah, I think that the Thomas Aquinas and the essence and energies distinction and all of that just really kind of plays together, because when you go back to the analogy of the frog, when you've got a nominal mind that ends up with a dissected dead frog, and you've got the essence energies distinction, which allows for the live frog, that there's a huge difference there. And Western Protestant theology, most of them, so I'm going to actually be a little bit more precise and just say like non-denominational evangelicalism, okay? Because Lutherans and some high Anglicans and a few others have less of a problem with this than your typical, non-denom evangelical does. That's the world I come out of. That's the world that I know. So that's the world that I speak to, right? So when you have zero ability and exposure to this idea of the essence energies concept, and the way that you have a very hard time getting over that nominalist systematic break between us and God. How do you interact with something that's not material, right? You don't have a bridge there, because you don't have a way to interact with God. And that's where the essence energies distinction is really important, because because we are not nominalists. And this is a very hard thing to shed coming out of a Protestant Western background. I still struggle with it a lot. But, the longer, it's one of those things, the longer that you're in and the more you just live it, the more it just kind of goes away. But, in not when with a nominalist mind, oh, God is almost not real. And I think that's part of what drives a lot of, at least in the circles I come out of, that need to be like, well, I need assurance that when I die, I have a ticket to heaven. How do I know I'm saved? Which usually means, how do I know I get into heaven when I die? If your connection to the divine is broken with nominalism, because it doesn't really exist, because you can't see it, it's not an observable form, it's very hard to bridge that. And so there's that anxiety. If that doesn't exist in my philosophical brain, the afterlife, the heaven, all of the hell, all that doesn't actually really exist, because I have no way to experience it, then how do I interact with it? How do I know, in my systematic Western scientific nominalist mind, how do I know when I stop I stop breathing, I don't stop existing? And when you have the essence energies distinction, and you don't have that nominalistic categorized breakdown of the dead dissected frog, it's much closer to the ancient Near East understanding that the spiritual and the physical realm is the same thing. There's not a break. I can't have my day-to-day life and my spiritual life. That's ridiculous. That's not a thing. So I'm very sorry if you're still like in that and stuck in that. But understanding that everything that I do, what I just had for dinner before we started live streaming, affects my spiritual connection to God, is a radical shift. And it shatters the nominalist understanding, because everything I do now not only affects everything now, but it affects everything in the entire span of my life. So my now affects my past, my future, like all of it is now. And that's a very different concept, a very difficult concept for a nominal systematic mind to get your head around. The concept of everything is spiritual and everything is now. And so you have with that, but that's part of wrapped into this bigger Trinitarian theology, which is held in the essence energies distinction, because the essence of God. So, okay, let me help linguistically. Let me help people kind of a little bit with some of these conversations, okay? Because we just talked about this last night in catechism class with the new group of catechumen. Okay, so when you're in a conversation with someone who's Orthodox and they're talking, they start getting into person and nature conversations, which is very much with the essence energies distinction. When you have to think of the what is the nature or the essence, it's ousia in Greek, same word. So, it's the same, the interchange essence and nature, same word, ousia in Greek. Okay, but that's the what. And then the who is the person. Right. So Shaun, you have an ousia, but you are a person, right? And those things are held together in those energies. And the energies are the thing that lets us interact with the essence of God, which is something that we cannot interact with. There is a difference in essence of God's nature and our nature. And you need those energies, which are those graces that allow us to interact with God. And that's about as far as I understand. So I can't get too much deeper into it other than, and this is why you'll hear in the Orthodox world, when you start getting into the fight between Calvinists and non-Calvinists and whatever, and like the distinctions of grace, and we're just throwing up our hands going, grace is grace, people, because grace is an uncreated energy of God.
Well, that's also where they would have a distinction, because they would say that grace is a creature.
Right. And to us, that's blasphemy. Like that's crazy. And that's been one of the funnest things for me to untangle and to be like, okay, grace is grace. Grace is uncreated, and it's not limited to whatever little old definition of grace that I have. Grace is so much bigger. Grace is cosmic. Grace is an energy. Grace is what allows me to interact with God the Father, and to interact with this Holy Spirit, and to interact with Christ the Son, because of grace. And I can't. It's one of those unexplainable things that, like, the scope of grace, I'm still a newbie who knows nothing. And my scope of grace has gone, it's gone from the size of Mercury to the size of Jupiter, right? In my understanding of it. And I still know nothing. And it's just like, but to understand, and this is one of the things that I started learning early first, before that, was my understanding of mercy. And I remember I was sitting there, because you sit through, we have what we call litanies, which are the prayers, the public prayers that we do throughout the services. So the deacon will read a part, and then we respond, Lord have mercy. And then the deacon will read, and then we respond, Lord have mercy. So all those things, they're all those prayers that we all echo his prayer with, Lord have mercy on that thing you just prayed for. And as I was sitting there listening through the litanies, and actually paying deep attention into what we were praying for. And I'm just like, I remember one day I realized, and I had to message a couple of our like mutual friends, and I was like, my view of mercy is way too small. And I had to expand my view of mercy, which forces you to expand your understanding of grace. Because if mercy, again, it was the size of Mercury, and now it's the size of the sun, right? Then you have to expand your understanding of grace, because it can't just be me and my getting my ticket to heaven, because that's a very truncated understanding of grace and mercy, because it's not about me. I get to be fortunate enough to benefit from it, but I'm not the focus of it.
Well,
It's really awesome.
it it's a very not only truncated version of mercy, but it's also a truncated version of, well, it's just a truncated understanding of ontology. Like when you think about what the mercy is that's being offered, and then you understand, like, I, I'm a human thing, and yet what's being offered to me is participation in the divine nature. Uh,
Mhm.
that is that. I mean, if it didn't say so in the Bible and in all the church fathers, that should be blasphemous, right?
Right.
Right? Like, I
Right.
mean, any good pagan would tell you that's blasphemous. You can't say that.
Mhm.
And if it wasn't that Jesus himself said, uh, glorify them, as like he's saying, glorify me as I was before, and glorify them also. And it's like,
Mhm.
wait a pause. Jesus, do you know what you're saying? Uh,
Yep.
and then in Revelation 3, where he says, to he who overcomes the world, I will grant you the right to sit on my
Uh-huh.
throne as I sit on my Father's
Uh-huh.
throne. Again, Jesus, I'm
Yep.
sorry, but this sounds blasphemous.
Yep.
If he wasn't God himself saying it, it would cause a lot of problems.
Mhm.
Um, and as you're talking about the difference between the person and the nature, I'm thinking too, well, in the West we have these distinctions too, but here's the problem, is that in the West the nature underlies the person. In the East, the person is what underlies the nature. It's what
Mhm.
the hypostasis or
Mhm.
hypostasis is, what you put the ousia on.
Mhm.
It subsists under it, because
Mhm.
the problem that they were wrestling with was, what is an individual, like what is a
Mhm.
self. And so they started with ideas like, well, once you take away all of the predicates, then the self is what's
Mhm.
left. um
Mhm.
and so they said, well, it has to be something immaterial. So like materialism is right out the window, because they're
Mhm.
trying to discuss this. I think in the West we just assume individual, like self, and then try to build everything else around that, and so you never have to wrestle with the problem. But when you're dealing with realism, and you're dealing with the more ancient philosophical understanding of what things are, that's a very real problem that they encountered. Um, and it's led to a lot of issues. Like, for example, the Eastern and Oriental Orthodox ended some of their problems are because of a different understanding of what hypostasis was
Mhm.
referring to, and so each had their understanding, and each was saying, well, the way that you're using it is blasphemous. But then it turns out that hey, you know what? We're actually saying the same thing. We're just using
Mhm.
different words, because it turns out that Coptic and Greek
Mhm.
are, related, but they have developed language in a certain direction. And so when they're talking, they're using the same words, but they have different meanings. Um, and so
Mhm.
it ended up becoming a problem, and that's why there's talks to heal that rift, um, which is way above me. But I was just
Yeah.
thinking that, in the West they have the same thing, but they put the cart before the horse, and you end up with a lot of problems, because
Mhm.
of course you're going to end up with a Calvinistic determinism if you say that my nature comes before my person, that my person emerges out of my nature. Um, because yet then of course you're bound by your nature. But then you have a problem, a very real problem that you have to explain, of, well, if a person emerges out of a nature, how does Christ have two natures? And they will say he does, but there's some real problem in
Mhm.
explaining that.
Mhm.
Whereas in the East, it makes perfect sense. You got two
Mhm.
natures, but you got one person, and that one person is the second person of the Trinity. He's the one who has always been and always will be. He took onto himself another nature. Well, that makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
There's no problem with that. In the West, there's problem with that.
Right. And I think that comes down to a couple of things, like at least for me in my untangling of all of this, it getting an understanding and a better handle on what actually what synergia actually is, and the ability to learn to be able to hold two things that seem like they're in conflict in tension. So it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to have, if you have two things in conflict, they can both be true and be in conflict at the same time. And in the East, that's not a problem for us, because we don't have these breakdown of this systematic categorization that makes that an impossible thing. And when you kind of step back and look at the bigger picture, and you are like looking at like the Trinity itself, it is one essence but three persons. So the essence holds the persons together in this consubstantial synergy, right? And that is also mirrored and I'm going to steal from one of our favorite friends, in a fractal in the incarnation, because it is one person with these two natures, right? And then you've got how we interact with each other, because our shared essence, our shared what of our nature, holds all of these individual persons together in the same consubstantial synergy that is echoed in the Trinity. But it gets more complicated in us as humans, because we're all wounded, we're all injured, we all need healing. And so my wounds will bump up against your wounds, and that will cause friction in that synergy, but it's still there. But you have to hold the nature higher than the individual to be able to go above that, and to be able to rise above those individual injury conflicts, because of that uniting thing that is our nature, but it is also Christ, because we are sharers in that. If Christ is, and this is where we go back again to, we got to start with our Christology, because if you really believe and you really live like Christ is fully human and fully divine, I mean, the implications of that, and how I treat you as an image bearer and as a believer, you are an image of Christ that is working on being perfected, right? Then that really changes the way that I see you as my brother or you as my sister, and the way that I interact with you, because we all hold that within ourselves. And it really radicalizes, I think, the approach you have, and it turns that individualism and the individualistic view of myself gets saved first, and oh yeah, because the church, it flips it back around and puts it in its proper order, because this is where, again, like systematically things break down. Calvinists aren't wrong that it's just corporate election, but it's not in the way that they think it is. It's not this, we think about it this way. So in our version of the corporate, I don't like the word, but we'll use it because it's a Western term that we're familiar with, right? So you think about this more like a forest of redwood trees. And if you've seen redwood trees before, and there's other trees like this, but I'm more familiar with these than others, so it works better for my telling of the story. But their roots don't go really, really deep. What they do is they interconnect and make a web with all of the redwood trees around them. So it's not just one tree standing with really deep roots against whatever hits it, which is the Western understanding of person. But in the East, it is, you are part of an interconnected web that if one tree falls, you're going to see several trees around it fall, or they're going to be leaning because they're all bearing the weight to hold the one tree that's going to fall over up. And if one goes down, everyone goes down around it. But in the way that I think non-denom evangelicals function, that they think of this corporate idea as a table full of potted bonsai trees. So I don't really ever touch you. I really am an island unto myself, but the whole table goes together. But it's a table of individuals and not an interconnected common nature that I choose to participate in or not.
And if that's the way that it is, then how is rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep anything other than just a performance? Because you're not really connected with them. It's just you choosing to put on this performance, right? Or you exercising some form of like altruistic empathy, but you're really you're not connected to them at all.
Yep. And I want to go back to something else too with the nominalism, because you hear a lot of like the background that I came out of. Okay. And a lot of us had really severe hangups with icons and saints. Like that is the two biggest major sticking points that you hear from people with the East and the Eastern Church. And most of the time people are pounding on sola scriptura. This isn't in the Bible. Show it to me in the pre-Nicene Fathers, because if it's not there, it's a corruption. It's like all this other, it's script, like, right? It's a script that everybody has. All of you coming out of this, I had the same script, and I got that pounded out of me pretty heavily by some pretty heavy hitters, some people, and both in my parish and some of the mutual friends that we have, really wrestling this through with me. And it goes back to, Shaun, a nominalistic understanding. Because you can't be a reflection of something bigger that is abstract if you're a nominalist. So you have a major problem with icons being able to let you interact with Christ and saints who in a nominalist framework cannot exist. So you are worshiping a dead piece of wood. But if you're not looking at it as a nominalist, and it is just a channel, it is a grace, it is an energy that allows us to interact with the divine. And saints are part of the divine grace. That is how we are able to interact with them, is through this divine grace, right? That's how they are able to communicate with us. And so icons and prayers to the saints, which people really at first have, problems with, because that's not a thing, it's not in the Bible. That's not really people's objection with it. People's real objection to that is a nominalist framework, which if it doesn't exist in front of me, it doesn't exist. So I can't interact with a dead saint, which we don't think that they're dead. I think the Bible's pretty clear about that. I can't interact with a dead, with something that's not real, that's not dead. If I'm a nominalist, that is a barrier that is very hard to break through. And icons, and it even causes problems with your ability to even pray. And why so many people struggle with their prayer life. I mean, all of us struggle with our prayer life. I'm not saying if you become Orthodox that you never struggle with your prayer life. It's not what I'm saying. But there's an extra barrier there if you're a nominalist. And why does it, you hear it a lot, Shaun, why do prayers get stuck in my head? Why don't they go anywhere? Why aren't they getting out of my head, out of my house, and going to God? That's because you're a nominalist. It's stuck in your head because that's the only place it can exist. And when you remove that barrier, then it's a whole different struggle in your prayer life. But
well, I wish our friend Troy would be able to be here just so I can, because you brought me into something that I've heard before, and I would love to see Troy just react to this, because he would explode in the way that only Troy can.
With his little happy dance, yes.
So how often have you heard when somebody says, well, why should we pray? The answer is, well, God commanded you to. Right? That is not, I'm sorry, that is not an answer. That is not an answer. That is just stupid sophistry. It's not an answer.
That's a Pavlovian response, is what that is.
Yeah, it's conditioning. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's ridiculous.
And you see, this is why nominalism is such a huge problem. And when you put nominalism into faith alone, grace alone, scripture alone, all of those 5 solas, and you stack nominalism on top of it, you're in a pit you have extremely difficult time digging your way out of. You know, this is where people misunderstand the Orthodox critique of the concert and the TED Talk. You know, people on a surface level get offended that it's, but if you look at that through a non-nominalist framework of what is happening in a Protestant, in a non-denom evangelical, framework, it's very disconnected and it can't go anywhere, because in a nominalist framework, you're only worshiping what's in front of you. And what's in front of you? The worship band and the preacher. There's a lot of churches now don't have crosses in the front. They don't have religious art, let alone icons or anything like that. So what is in front of you? You've got a worship band and a pastor who can't take you to God, because you're a nominalist and only thing you're worshiping is what's in front of you. That's what the Orthodox are really saying when we're getting into this critique of this concert and the TED Talk, because in a nominalist framework, you're worshiping the worship band and your pastor. And you're emotionally hijacking people into thinking that you have something that transcends your nominalism to connect you to God, and calling it the Holy Spirit. Whether it is or not, I cannot qualify to judge. I'm not God. I can't say. But that was a very common experience for me and a lot of the people I've been talking to, coming out of those kinds of Protestant backgrounds. And all of a sudden, they're like, wait a minute, the Holy Spirit? What the heck is that? What do you mean it's not just Jiminy Cricket and telegrams from God? Like, this whole idea that God and the Trinity are everywhere present at all times, filling all things, becomes very different when you're not a nominalist.
Yeah, that's not my nominalist. Oh, I love that. Now, some of our audience may not understand where the critique of, well, why even pray comes from. In the West, the idea of divine simplicity is much different than it is in the East. In the West, the idea is that God's operations are identical to his essence, and therefore everything that he does is one act. You cannot interact with that with any reciprocity. There's no understanding of reciprocity, and in fact, somebody like Aristotle would say, and Augustine later echoed this, that you cannot actually have any relationship with that kind of being because everything flows downstream out of him. So your prayers, in the Western understanding, are, there's no way that they're going to God, because everything is downstream from God. Now, thankfully, most of our denominations are not philosophically robust enough to actually be able to wrestle with that. But if you do get to that point, you have a crisis. And in fact, Augustine went so far as to say, at the baptism of Jesus, when the voice spoke, this is my son, he said, who was it that said that? Because God didn't enter into time in order to say that. He exists entirely outside of time and entirely outside of circumstance. He cannot come into relationship with anything because he's the perfect being. The essence energy distinction really fixes all of that, where you can actually have a very real relationship, a reciprocal relationship with God, because his energies and his essence are both him, and yet his energies are able to enter into time without compromising the simplicity of his essence.
Yeah, I think the distinction for me, as far as I understand it, and if you have questions, please go talk to somebody more qualified than me. Go talk to a priest, because I am not the one to, and I'm not officially, representing anybody other than me and my ignorant self, right? But as far as I understand it, the difference between Western divine simplicity and Eastern divine simplicity is Western divine simplicity collapses personhood into nature, and it makes it the same thing. And it's not the same thing. You have to have the distinction of person and nature. Those are that is a crucial thing. And then you get to hear, I heard people like Dr. Ryan Mullins talking about like time is an attribute of God, which doesn't make any sense because time is an energy that allows us to interact with God. So to make it an attribute or one of the essences of God makes absolutely no sense. But it's not created either in that essence energies distinction. But
Right.
we experience time as a created reality because we are created beings. But that doesn't necessarily make time created. It just makes our experience with it as created beings. And that's a very hard distinction for people to be able to make and to separate. Time isn't really created, so time doesn't really exist, except we experience that it does because we are created. And
Now,
to a Western mind, that's just like, huh? What?
to give the reluctant theologian credit, because I do love Dr.
Mhm.
R.T. Mullins, he what he would be doing there by saying that time is an attribute of God is trying to, it's almost like he's copying orthodoxy's work. He's looking over at what orthodoxy is doing and he's like, okay, so I put this here, and the attributes of God would be the Western equivalent to the energies of God, except for the fact that they collapse it all into the essence.
Mhm.
And so it's almost like, um it's almost like this is it's I don't want to say it's a game, but it's almost like a farce where you're going to explode out all of the simplicity of God into
Mhm.
these fictional structures that really cannot exist because God is simple, and you're going to
Mhm.
place time as an attribute of God and then recollapse it back into the essence and say, see, it's just one thing. Well,
Mhm.
you've done something here that affects the singular essence of God, where now you're putting parts in there that cannot be in there because
Mhm.
God can't have parts and be simple.
Yeah.
But he's trying to locate it into what the Western equivalent of the energies would be, which is the operations, but that makes it identical uh, in the Western theology to the essence. So you have to call it an attribute. In the East, uh, they don't even really discuss the attributes of God except for apophatically,
Mm-mm.
right?
Yep.
Because you can't know the
You,
attributes apart
nope.
from the energies, because that's the
Yeah.
only thing that we could experience. Because, like,
Right.
I can't know Amber in your essence. I can only
Right.
know you in your energies, and that's how I interact with you. Um, so yeah, I think, to be fair to him,
Yeah.
he's trying to do that, but in the West, it runs aground very fast.
It does, and it because and I think that again, this all has to go back to your Christology, and all of it does. All of these conversations and understanding how all this works, because Christ is in getting very dangerously close to heresy. He is our created interface with the divine. But again, that's borderline probably heretical way to say it. But in a Western understanding, that gets you a starting place to get you to a better, bigger thing, right? So, you know, it really because yes, the essence of God, the essence of the Trinity is unknowable to created beings. We cannot understand and know God's energies or his essence. Sorry. The only way that we can know what we know is through the energies of God. But that is limited because we are not uncreated. So we can never get to the uncreated essence because we are created. So, but again, we've come beyond the borders of what I actually know. So we're going to have to kind of back up a little bit because definitely don't want to get myself in trouble.
No, absolutely, and I wouldn't ask you to compromise yourself, or go, up to the point of, where your ignorance meets what you do know, and you're way past me. I know certain things, and so I like to talk about them and make myself feel intelligent and important. But yeah, no, I think that we're wading into territory that may be over a lot of people's heads, and we may end up losing some of the audience. Um, but you had talked about Luther,
Mhm.
and you had said that uh, prior to that, even that the image of God was covered, but it wasn't lost. It
Mhm.
was buried. And Luther, interestingly, used a similar analogy in the exact reverse way. He said that we are like dung or snow covered dung when we are covered by the grace of God. And so in the idea of the image being buried, it's dung covered snow. And until uh something happens that removes that buried image, or removes the image from what it's buried under, the substrate that it's buried under, and is able to uncover it and clean it off, and here we have the image. um Troy and I had a conversation that was recorded, and I think it aired last Friday,
Mhm.
um where we discussed the difference between the image and the likeness, and how
Mhm.
the image was never lost, and yet the maturity of man is moving towards the likeness of God, and that this is the process of theosis,
Mhm.
ultimately, is to become like God.
Right.
um, it's interesting because he shared something with me
Mhm.
immediately after we recorded that, and uh it was Nathan Jacobs who had a very similar conversation, and we almost followed point for point on that. And I had never heard of Nathan
Mhm.
Jacobs prior to that. Like I said,
Mm.
I've gone way down the well, or the rabbit hole, rather, of Nathan Jacobs, and I'm loving everything that I find. But I messaged him back, and I said, if I didn't know that I had never encountered this person before, I would assume that our episode was plagiarized, because it followed point by point. And he said, "Well, that's what happens in orthodoxy. When
Mhm.
you learn the mind of the church, you end up looking at the same points, and each one leads into the next."
Mhm.
Since we had talked about the phronema, do you find that in you kind of becoming immersed in the mind of the church, that your conversations kind of tend to go, we're going to start with the Trinity, we're going to go here, we're going to go here, and it's almost like you can have this
Mhm.
script, but instead of it being like this nominalist script where we're going to, this might point to this, and this, if you look at it right, might go this way, it's actually this literally flows out of this.
Mhm.
And could you talk about how easy it is to have a theology that flows organically?
Yeah, it's actually really a lovely thing, because you don't have as much confusion, because because it's organic and it's participatory. You always end up starting at the source, and you start with, because the Trinity is the source of everything, and then it all kind of flows, you know, from there. And that's why, like, we always have to go back up to our Christology. Let's back up to the image of God. Let's back up to creation. Let's back up to the Trinity, because you have to start at the source and then follow the stream down, follow that stream where it goes. You can't start at the bottom and then try to reconstruct your way back up. That is logical assent. That is mental assent. And that is where, and I also want to kind of back up and nuance some of our discussion earlier, because it's not simply nominalism, because you've got nominalism, you've got some Gnostic thinking in there, some Neoplatonism in there, that gets corrupted from what those, So some of that gets really, really complicated and takes way too long to explain, and some of it's still over my head, right? But there's a whole lot of compounding factors that collide. So you can't just point to one thing and say it's just this or it's just this. All of it fractures and breaks all of these things that naturally are um, consistent connections, because in the Orthodox way of experiencing and participatory, because everything comes into fulfillment in the incarnation, and that's the thing that we live in. It all just flows naturally without a lot of these breaks and inconsistencies. And I remember when I was going through a lot of the conversations with some of our friends and sitting through catechism class, and I just was sitting there watching my systematic theology burn to the ground. And I'm just like, I can breathe. I don't know what this is exactly, but I can breathe where I'm at. So, it makes, I don't want to say it makes more sense, because that's a logical assumption and not the way that we experience it, but it becomes your lived experience. And so it just is a natural, you start at the beginning and then everything flows out of that, because, the Trinity, and it's like, you can't explain it, but that's why we have things like the Nicene Creed that lay that out so beautifully, and why it flows in that order. And to us, those things, when people just summarily dismiss it as later interventions, and we're going, no, this is wrestling with, how do we express the unexpressible? How do you express the essence of God? You can't, but it's going to take you a couple of 400 years of arguing to actually put the words and perfect the words that are still true to who God is, and not, because, if you look at all of that, it takes a word or two and you're in heresy. Like, it is very, very fine. That is a very narrow path to walk. And that's one of the things that I learned the hard way in my thesis work, and my Orthodox scholars that I was talking to, and my own clergy, and one of my poor deacons spent a lot of time with me. And as I was asking him questions and explaining I got to read almost instant look on his face. And I was like, uh-oh, what did I do? What did I say? How did I express that wrong? Because it is such a narrow, fine road to not, because you can end up in all those 7 ecumenical councils are dealing with people who misstepped just a little bit, and it drifted off into a train wreck.
Well, and so, maybe in order to relieve the consciences of some of the people who were listening, the Nicene or Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed was not created for the purpose of exposing people who had a wrong understanding. It was created for exposing false teachers who wanted to try to fly under the radar. So the creed, the specific language is intentional. And it's very intentional that it's would be super easy to step into a ditch on the left or the right. The reason was because they were combating so many heresies of people who
Yep.
tried to say, look, I'm just like you. It's not exposing the flock. That should be
Right.
dealt with pastorally.
Right.
It's exposing false teachers who are now raising up another flock, another church. And it's to protect those people who are in that church from false teachers. Because we had a problem with Nestorius, right? Nestorius, I think he was at so he thought that, hey, we're cool with Chalcedon, like yeah, we can totally affirm that. And they they were like, no, Chalcedon was held for the purpose of like saying, no, you, or maybe it was Ephesus and Constantinople. But it was one of those that they were only like 20 years apart. And so they were like, hey, this is held because of what Nestorius said. I think it was Ephesus and Constantinople. Um, this was held for the purpose of condemning Nestorius, but Nestorius is still out doing his stuff, and he's saying that he can affirm this. And so then they had to hold another one of saying, no, no, actually, we're going to hold your feet to the fire. You can't affirm this.
Can I nuance that a little bit, because
Go right
I think
ahead.
that's a little bit off in your approach and your nuance from what I understand. Okay, and I, again, I'm not an expert. Go ask a priest, because they will be able to better answer this. But councils and ecumenical councils were called to hold up the teaching, that is this teaching in line with what Christ handed down to us? Yeah, yes or no? And they would pick it apart. And if it ended up holding out to be true, then it wasn't a problem. If it held out to not be true, the teaching was condemned. And the dealing with the false teacher happened outside the council, and many attempts were made to bring them back in, to repent from this, change it, accept correction. They refuse, they refuse, they refuse. So when the teaching is condemned as a heresy, and then the teacher is unrepentant, then the teacher is thrown out. But it's more about the teaching and preserving the mind and the teachings of the church, and then the unrepentant are dealt with. And it in which you see those condemnations of Arius and Nestorius and Marcion and like all those guys, is just an affirmation that this guy was thrown out, this guy was anathematized, and that needs to be confirmed. So it isn't like our, this isn't Perry Mason, where they've got Arius standing up there being grilled and held as a judge, and then a sentence is given. No, like they're examining these teachings with a very fine-tooth comb to see, do they hold up to the teachings of Christ? And if not, after many attempts, because I mean, you just read the letters and the correspondence around the councils and the writings of the fathers in correcting these heresies, how many attempts for several years of patiently trying to bring them back around into the correct mind of the church. And then it was like, no, doing what St. Paul said, if this false teacher will not repent, throw him out and leave him to hell, hopefully to bring him to repentance. And they have said, the bishops had decided this guy is good, who has to go. We have put that in motion, and now we need that affirmed, because it's already, the process has already played itself out. So that is the affirmation of the end of the process of the person, but it's more about preserving the teaching as the primary focus of those.
I really appreciate that nuance. And that really helps to clarify that this wasn't like the trial of Servetus, where we're just like, hey, how do we burn this guy? Right? Like, yeah, it wasn't specifically going after the person. It was condemning the teaching and hoping to restore the person. I really like that. And that I don't necessarily know if I want to go here, but I'm gonna do it anyway because
Do it anyway. Let's do it.
right. So the Orthodox view of the Protestants and I think that everyone would agree the wonderful work that they've done in certain areas, the work that God absolutely has been moving in those areas. I think that the Orthodox view of those things is, hey, we want to see the light. We want to see God moving wherever He's moving, but we know where God has ordained that He is going to be moving. When He works outside of that, that is God just being merciful and loving, like He always is, and we want to celebrate that. But we also mourn that you're at a different table. You're at a different altar. You're not in communion with us. And you have a different church. And so I would think that the Orthodox would say, hey, we rejoice that God is doing what He's doing because God is always good. He's always going to do that. And we're glad to see God doing things despite these schisms, despite these people being outside of the church, maybe for no fault of their own. Maybe they were born into it. But we're still going to lament that we can't fellowship together. Would that be an accurate way to look at it?
I'm going to answer this question in a very weird way that you probably are not going to expect at all. Okay. But I think this, I was just thinking about this yesterday as I was talking to some of our catechumen, and there's a couple thoughts. First of all, like, stepping back and looking at where people's wounds are. I think this touches a lot of Protestant nerves, and it's not their fault. The only thing you know is Protestantism. That's the only way you have to understand God and the world. And we believe in the mercy and grace of God in a way that we don't understand. So, but to answer your question, Shaun, I'm going to come about it this way, and I might lose a few people, but we'll try to catch them back up at the end. So, creation, there is a natural created order, and the way that the world was created to function. And everything in that God created and deemed good. And when humans were introduced into it, it was created very good. It was never named perfect, but that very good. If you look at Genesis 3 and the curses, who's cursed? The serpent is cursed and the land is cursed. But men and women bear the consequences of the fall, but they are not cursed, and that goodness is never taken away. Okay. So the natural state of humans and the natural state of creation is that very good that is yet to be perfected, right? And then the fall and sin and wounds to the soul is not the natural state. To us, it feels like the natural state because that's all we know. All we know is living in the fallen world. We don't understand outside of how that works. So we are living in the unnatural state of creation. And when you look at miracles, okay, we think miracles, wow, that's outside of the natural way that the world works. Miracles are God putting things back the way they're supposed to be. So like I heard Father Stephen DeYoung explain it this way, so I'm going to steal this from him. So I know it's correct, right? So, so say someone is brought into the church who's been diagnosed with brain cancer, and we pray for a miracle, right? If a healing miracle is unnatural, just removing the tumor doesn't hold. To be if it's actually an unnatural act of God, the brain would be removed and you would still be alive with a tumor in your head. But what a miracle actually is, the tumor is unnatural, and it's putting the brain back into the natural state in which it's supposed to be by removing the unnatural thing, which is the tumor. So it's putting things back the way it belongs naturally. Okay. And in the mind of the Orthodox Church, and holding and passing down the teachings of Christ and the way that we view the body of Christ and the big T tradition, and that this is the order that Christ set up. But in the breaking away and in the schisms, it puts you in the unnatural. And so coming back into the church is coming back to the natural established order. That doesn't mean that God can't function outside. It's just that this is what we believe was handed down, the natural path to God. And you don't need a divine intervention in the unnatural to restore it to the natural, because you're already in the natural. So it's not that God can't work. We don't define how God works. We don't say where the Spirit can go and where the Spirit can't go. There are fruits of the Spirit everywhere the Spirit is. But what we're saying is that this is what Christ gave us, and this is the most natural place. And I also heard another priest one time say that in this conversation about surety of salvation and dealing with OSAS and conditional security and all of that, that you will never hear an Orthodox person say, I am saved. They will always say, I hope I am saved, but I don't know. But actually, in the mind of the way that the Orthodox think about things we actually have the most, in this natural, unnatural comparison analogy, the most natural progression to salvation. So it is the most secure path. And when you're outside of the natural path, doesn't mean you can't climb the mountain. It just means you're going off the marked trail. So we know on the trail where the benches are. We know where the bathroom stops are. We know where the vista points to take the best pictures are. We know where the ranger stations are. All of those things are already laid out and already known. And we know how, the church knows what it's doing in healing and dealing with trauma and all of these things. And when you get outside of the known, we have no way to help you. How do I know? How do I gauge, if you're not coming to your spiritual father for confession, you're not taking the Eucharist, you're not involved in prayer and almsgiving in a way that is familiar, we can't say at all. So we're not going to. And it's not a we're right, you're wrong condemnation. You have to think about it more in this natural, unnatural way of looking at things, because to us, this is the natural path. And if you go rogue, you might get to the top of the mountain. We can't say, but we can't go find you if you get stuck and stranded and injured out there, because we don't know where you are, right?
So would a good analogy be that they would say that the Orthodox Church is like a pilgrimage. It's a well-worn path that has lots of places that are just right off the path because of the fact that this is such a well-worn path and it's so well traveled, and everything there is designed for you, for your betterment. And if you're not a part of the pilgrimage, you're on an expedition, and you may
Yep.
get to the same destination, but it is not going to be comfortable, and it's not going to be pretty, and you're going to need some attention when you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good way to look at it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Um, yeah, and there was one thing that Nathan Jacobs said in one of his podcasts that resonated with me. Uh, and he said, he asked his guest, he said, "Are you a Protestant?" And the guest said, "Yeah, yes, of course, he's a Protestant." And he said, "Are are you still protesting? Or is
Hmm.
there anything that the Latin Church could do where you would say, hey, we're reconciled. I'm going back in because this was a protest and we were refraining from communion until you change certain things. Okay, now we're going to go back and join communion. Or are you so separated? Are you so comfortable that we might as well just call this what it is? This is a divorce and you've created a new church." Um, and I think that's something that Protestants and evangelicals are going to have to wrestle with is, are you are you still in a state of protesting where, hey, we're just waiting for them to come around and we'll be right back there? Or are you so far removed from the Latin West Church that you just accept you're another church? Or is it, do you have a Gnostic view of the church, that the church is this invisible entity, a Gnostic and coincidentally nominalist view of the church,
Hmm.
where the church is just this invisible nebulous entity and you're just going to arbitrarily place all of these Christians into this category? um, and I think that is a question that it's uncomfortable, to have to sit with that, um, to say that I want to claim that I am part of the same church as all of the early church fathers, and yet I have a view of the church that none of them had. I have a view of the church and Christ's body that nobody espoused until 500 years ago, and not even that, because those churches were all state churches. I guess nobody espoused until Pennsylvania. um, so what would, I don't know. I really just hit them with pain, and I want to give them salve. Um, what good medicine do you think would help people who are maybe grappling with this of what do I do in this situation? And let's say, because I'm assuming that your answer would be obviously, well, look to the east. But what if they have issues with that? Like
Hmm.
they're in a place where, because of their conscience, they just
Hmm.
couldn't do that. Um, what are things that they can do to try to relieve this tension?
Well, I think I want to nuance a little bit what you said and say that I think there's kind of two groups there that now that we kind of see. You've got people who are still would be able to call themselves Protestants. You've still got, and these are going to be more of your liturgical traditions, like your Lutherans and your Wesleyans and your some of those. Like those are still going to fit in that Protestant model because they're still going to have gripes with Rome, still protesting some of the things that Rome did. They would still kind of fit in that category. And then you've got the rest of them. And a lot of this is the non-denominational evangelical world, which fits under this umbrella that's called restorationism. And that's one, and the group I come out of is very proud of that label. They call themselves the Restoration Movement. They just bold-faced out with it. But so many people that come out of that space, it's this restoration mindset. And they're like, that struggle, exactly what you're talking about. I want to go back to the first century church, but I'm also trying to reconstruct something because of my nominalism, Gnostic, Neoplatonist, systematic brain. I have to reconstruct something that didn't actually really exist, that looked like something that wasn't there. So I'm trying to restore something that never really was into something that never can be. Right. So there's this and that's why I think that a lot of people are struggling and feeling so broken and empty. And like I was spiritually starving to death because you're trying to live in a space that never existed into something that never can exist. And I think that for me, Shaun, I think that I was very fortunate to run into a group of people who had gone through that process already and were able to sit with me. And a lot of the hangups that people have, I think, this is where you have to learn to see the image of God in people and where their image is covered over and where their wounds are. Because people aren't really, if you get down to it, they're not really arguing about sola scriptura. They're not really arguing about icons. They're not really arguing about saints. They're not really arguing about priests and all of the smells and bells and the normal things that make Protestants recoil. That's how they justify their reactions and logically think through, okay, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, because those things are touching a wound that I have, that I don't even know that I have. And I think like for me, yeah, we had a lot of very rough conversations where it was arguing through the logic of those things that aren't logical, they're experiential. But it was more about them being able to, and my clergy being able to see beyond those objections that I was voicing to the pain and wounds that I was expressing that was underneath that. And so being able to sit with what isn't working for me where I'm at, what injuries, what wounds, what pain am I experiencing, and can where I'm at address that issue? And answering and being honest with yourself and saying no is a very difficult thing because none of us want to be wrong. And I think there's this fear that I hear a lot, and I had the same fear, that if I'm wrong about these things and I'm wrong that this isn't really feeding my soul, what if I'm wrong about all of it and God doesn't exist and God can't save me, and where am I going to go? And if you're in ministry, this is even bigger because I'm going to lose my livelihood. Some of us lost family members and friends, and the cost is high to honestly answer those questions. So sometimes it's safer to argue with people we disagree with than to honestly look at those things in us. Is this my brokenness? Probably. And am I in a broken place? Maybe. And then it's just sitting down and being very honest and spending a lot of honest prayer going, Christ, Jesus, help me. I'm trying to find you. Help me find and follow your voice to where I belong. And being very honest with yourself that maybe this place I've been for, I walked away from a church that I've been in 9 years. I had a lot of friends, and almost none of them speak to me anymore. And it really saddens me because, but they couldn't answer my questions. And I became a problem to them because I was asking questions they didn't want to answer and they couldn't face, because then you'd have to face your own brokenness. And that's one of the hardest things to get your head around and to deal with, to sit and face the fact I'm broken and I'm in a broken place. And this place that I was in didn't have the actual living reality of the church being a hospital, because it's one thing for it to be a theoretical thing, and the nominalism, Neoplatonistic, Gnostic mind has a very hard time with this concept as well. We can call the church a hospital, but we run it like a corporation, which is not a hospital. And getting into a place where you actually find a soul hospital who understands, they may not have the words to express it in modern English, but in my experience and dealing with people and talking to priests and all of the things that I'm doing and the work that I'm doing, the research and the conversations that I'm having, being in a place that may not understand to be able to articulate, trauma and spiritual trauma and using the words of trauma recovery and some of these things. But the church hold memory of trauma since Genesis 3. So it remembers trauma. It remembers how to heal trauma, and it is slow and it's painful, and it takes a whole lot of bravery to face those kinds of wounds, not only just in yourself, but in the place where you're at. And is the Orthodox Church perfect? Absolutely not. But it does hold a memory of unbroken healing that other groups just don't hold. A church that's only been around since 1820 has no idea how to suffer persecution. It has no idea how to heal from deep schism and brokenness. And it doesn't hold those memories. So how can you fix something? If I go to urgent care and I need very deep healing for, cancer that's gotten into almost every system in my body, urgent care can't do that. They could patch me up and get me out the door, what they did with my knee, and put me in a brace and a cane and send me home and say, go to physical therapy. They can do that. And all of the churches that I went to and the people that I'm talking to about coming out of these things, those are urgent cares. They could patch you up, get you back on your feet. But the deep wounds, without the experience of someone who's been doing this for millennia, it's very hard to be able to see those wounds and to know how to heal them. And I would just say, yeah, it's hard. And you may never be able to get there. But in that, starting to sit down and honestly look at, why do I feel this emptiness? Why do I feel like I don't belong? Why do I feel like this isn't working for me? Why can't I get anywhere? Why am I praying and it doesn't feel like it's getting answered? Why, God, if Jesus is supposed to heal and save me, why do I feel like my life is still a wreck and I'm not getting anywhere? That's our own wounds, but that's also maybe you're in a place that isn't quite ready and doesn't know how to handle those things. And it has nothing to do with them being bad people. Every Protestant pastor I know is full of the love of God and feels like they're trying to do their best in a broken system. And you can only get so far, with, if you got 2 tires off your truck, you're only going to get so far with 2 wheels on your 4-wheel truck, right? So none of us in the Orthodox Church that honestly want to have these good conversations and have conversations with people about healing and about Christ and about who he is in the incarnation want to say that you're doing anything wrong. It's just that you've inherited a system that isn't equipped to deal with a lot of these really deep things that we struggle with, that goes down into our, that wounds the person, and that we've inherited from Genesis 3. And if you haven't been around that long, you're dealing with, staph infections with Tylenol. And it doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean that people are struggling are bad people. And none of us are condemning any of it. Ultimately, what we're saying is just sit with it and cry out to God. Christ will meet you. And he will give you direction and lead you where you can find that healing. And like some of our mutual friends, Shaun, said to me a lot in the very beginning, they wouldn't even talk to me at all until I went to an Anglican church, a Lutheran church, a Catholic church. Like, go find where is Christ calling you. You may end up in the Catholic church. You may end up in an Anglican church. You may end up at the Baptist church 4 blocks up. You may end up somewhere else. But the important thing is finding where you find Christ, because that is where life and healing is in Christ. And that's what I think I would say.
That was so awesome, so beautiful. I'm gonna let that sit there for just a minute, because I feel bad just jumping in out on the back of that. That was so pastoral, so beautiful. Okay. I also think that the Protestants, especially the evangelicals, are going to have this anxiety of, you're telling me Orthodox is the way that I got to do, or I got to go. What do I got to do to become Orthodox? Right? Like, because there's this idea of, I am saved. Like, okay, what do I have to do? And I think that an Orthodox Christian would respond with exactly what you said. You need to find Christ, because Christ is willing to meet you where you're at. Now, what that will sound like to some people who have encountered Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons are, Christ will encounter you where you're at and lead you to my church, which is not what you're saying.
No.
So if you're a Protestant who is concerned that maybe Orthodox are right, then maybe listen to what the Orthodox are saying and don't jump into a conversion that you're going to regret. Because in our analogy of the expedition, you're not alone going up the mountain. Christ is with you, right? And he's rooting you on, and he wants you to get to the top of the mountain. You just didn't take the what do you call it? Not the consumer route, but the you didn't
take the common path. Yeah.
The common path. You decided to take the scenic route, and now you're going to be there for a while, and all of the scrapes, the bumps, the bruises, all of the things that you feel in your spirit that are not getting healed, it's not because Christ doesn't want to heal them. It's because you're not at the place where the vendors are who sell the things that will heal those things. You are out in the middle of Timbuktu trying to climb up a mountain, and it is not going to feel pretty and fun. But the Orthodox would not be sitting there saying, you have to convert and all these things in order for you to have the grace of God in your life. And it's not like that, is it?
I think ultimately we would say we have the best chance of helping heal your soul, but the choice is yours. It's never forced. And that's one of the things about the inquirer and catechist process. You can't just walk into an Orthodox church and walk up to the priest and say, I want to be baptized and join the church. And they're going to be like, slow down, because you have to be brought in. And it's a process that at its fastest takes 6 months. A lot of people take a year. I know somebody at my parish is on year 3. Sometimes it takes as long as it takes. But because there has to be this period, not just of you getting to know the church and you starting to understand why we do the things we do, and understanding our theology, and starting to knock some of those, Western systematic thinking out of your head and start to teach you the phronema. But we also need time to get to know you. Because if you just jump right in and get baptized right away, how do we know how to help you? We need time to get to know you. You need the clergy to spend time having conversations with you and start interacting with them, and they're the ones who are going to know, okay, you're coming out of this, and by the things that you're telling me, the Holy Spirit is going to give me the right words, and to give me the right, like we say, explain it this way. The church needs to know what prescriptions that you need. Because if you have an allergy to something, and I give you something that contains, if you have a peanut allergy, and I actually have to give you medicine that contains peanuts because I didn't spend enough time getting to know you really well, I don't want to harm you. I don't want to give you medicine that's going to make you sicker than you already are. And so it's a very slow process. At no point at a I'm going to say at a real honest Orthodox church, at no point is anything forced. At every point, you have the ability to say, hold on. And at any point, you can walk out the door. No judgment. And you might walk back in 8, 9, 10 months, 2, 5, 12 years later, and you'll be welcomed right back without judgment. Because we understand that this is a very difficult transition for people. And it's hard to face brokenness and healing and how wounded you are. And nobody wants to admit that we're sick. Nobody wants to admit, the truth is hard. If it's actually truth, it's hard. And so having people that sit with you for a long period of time, and as long as you need, and talk through objections and hangups and pain, to be able to get to know you well enough to know when you're fully brought into the church, when you're ready, then okay, now here is the medicine and the way that we're going to do that. Because this is another thing, I think, Shaun, that Protestants misunderstand about Orthodoxy, because we are not the Roman Catholic Church, and it's not a prescription. So you don't go into for confession. You don't go into, like, it's not like TV where you go sit in this box where you're anonymous and you spout out every bad thing you did, and then the priest tells you, do 27 Hail Marys and 15 prostrations and whatever. Here's the math formula here's the thing, how many times I did wrong, so here's how many times I need to do the opposite to make up for that. And then the human priest forgives you. That's not at all how it works. It's more like, where is my relationship with God still broken? And then, okay, so this is the thing that's a problem for you. So let's try doing this. And giving you the actually, not just, here's the, way I buy my way or earn my way out of what I did. It's no, what's happening to you, and the reason you keep doing these things is you still have a wound. Okay, so here's the next step in healing that wound. And it's going to be, all of this takes a long time therapy. So there's no instant in the Orthodox Church. That is a concept that doesn't exist, because it takes a lifetime to heal from the damage that we live through and that we continue to do to ourselves and each other. And it's not like once you step into the church, you stop getting wounded and you stop wounding other people, because we're still wounded and broken, and we still wound and break others, and we still wound and break ourselves. So it takes your entire life. And I think that's also a hard concept, because I want to get somewhere and I want to feel better. I don't want to hurt anymore. And there is a lot of relief, but there's also a lot of facing truth. And that's scary.
And I think that, again, a Protestant is going to hear this and say, oh, great, now you're telling me it's going to take my entire life in order to be saved? What kind of good news is that? But, we got to remember that Saint Mary of Egypt received communion exactly once before she died, and she's a saint. I think it's Felicity and Perpetua are martyrs. That's the highest rate of recognition you could get, and they were never baptized. They died as catechumens. And so the idea is not, hey, this process takes forever, and if you don't get to the very end of it and become perfect, you're screwed.
Yeah. Nope.
That's but see, in like the Roman Catholic world, there is a sense of this that,
Mhm.
hey, you get baptized, reconciliation, and if you die with a single sin on your soul, you're going to hell. And so it's very formulaic in the
Yeah.
West. And so obviously, like, you can see why the reaction against that would be, well, no, it's not by works. You got to just have faith. And if you just have faith, like, you're good. And I feel like the ancient Christians would, in some places, they talk about it is by faith. And then that exact same author, a little bit later, will talk about the works that one has, or that one should do in order to please God, and um to really work out salvation in their life, in order to work out this healing, in order to need heaven into their hearts and into their souls. So it's not a one or the other, it's the both. And but I feel like Orthodoxy has it sits at this point where the Western Church looks at it and says, okay, the question of faith or works
Mhm.
is kind of answered in Orthodoxy of yes.
Yes.
And you have the conservative evangelicals, and you have the progressive liberal Christians, and the conservative evangelicals are missing something therapeutic, and the liberal progressives are missing something doctrinal. um,
Mhm.
and I feel like that they're reacting to something um, real, and yet they're leaving open gaping holes, because
Mhm.
neither one of them has what the ancient church has, which
Mhm.
is this wholeness, this therapy. And I feel like, from what I understand about Orthodoxy, that they're not even like looking like, hey, what all do we need? They're just like, hey, this is what we are.
Mhm.
And we just happen to encompass everything that you need. Is that a decent?
So let me kind of explain, or kind of answer that with a parable, with a story from the Gospels. Okay, so the man that is healed at the pool of Bethesda. It took a heck of a lot of faith for him to drag himself to the edge of that pool, but he just couldn't get in on his own. So that was faith through the work of dragging his body as far as he could get, and then Christ comes and gives him the grace to finish it. And then that's all we have to do. That's all that's really asked of us, is the faith to keep dragging ourselves to Christ, for Christ to finish that process. So yes, you have to have both, because there is, there is, to have any kind of spiritual growth, you have to put in prayer. You have to read your Bible. You have to show up to church. There's stuff you have to do. That is work. And to say that faith alone, well, that's not going to get you anywhere. Really, it's not. And that's, I think, the biggest takeaway that I've learned. And I love the story of the man at the pool of Bethesda so much, because Christ met him where he was. He got as far as he could get, and Christ finished the work. Same thing with the prodigal son. He heads back. What does God do? He doesn't wait. He runs and meets him where he was. God is always responding to run to meet us where we are. This is the incarnation. Humanity is crying out in wounded brokenness, wanting to be reconciled with God. And God, Logos, it tabernacled among us, put on flesh and tabernacled among us, came down to meet us in our brokenness. We have to put in enough effort in our faith to get far enough, and Christ will meet that effort.
So would you say that a good way to describe it is faith put into practice?
Mm-hmm. Faith put into action. I mean, because a lot of those words, Shaun, are verbs. Pistis is used as a verb. These are action words that get translated as nouns into the English.
So it's faithing.
Yes.
Kind of.
Faith is there's this concept in Hebrew, and Greek does the same thing. They express it differently, but an abstract concept never actually happens without an action attached to it. So it can't exist without an observable action. So faith and works is two sides. Why we say two sides of the same coin, because without the action of the observable thing that makes the unobservable real, like you need action. That's why St. Paul in so many of his letters, and St. James talks about faith without works is dead. Why? Because my faith compels me to act. It compels me to work. It compels me to want to do these things. And it compels me to keep going back to Christ. And if I say I can have faith and any kind of works is merit-based, you're completely undercutting the fact that my faith compels me to keep pursuing Christ, and that takes effort.
Well, and I also think that the question of how faith and works play into it is maybe a bit of an overreaction to Pelagius. Pelagius was saying that you could do everything necessary to please God without grace. And somehow that got spun into you cannot even have faith without grace. Um, I feel like it was just like a ridiculous over. It's like that little if you remember Vines, the guy who sees a spider and shoots it with a shotgun, like just way overreaction. And it's like you weren't even addressing the question that was raised, because if you read everyone before Augustine, all of the church fathers before Augustine, they had no problem with saying, yes, it's faith. Yes. And these are the things that faith accomplishes. Like faith does stuff. And if your faith isn't doing stuff, then you should get that looked at because your faith died. Uh, I mean, that's what James says. Faith without works is dead. Is it breathing? Does it have a pulse? No? Okay. You may want to get that cleaned out because your faith something died in there. And Deborah wrote, "The father ran to meet the son when he was afar off. It wasn't perfect. The
Nope.
father ran to meet him and welcomed him back." And I think that somebody said, and I can't remember who it was, and I don't know if they were Roman Catholic or Orthodox. It doesn't matter. But somebody said that the entirety of the gospel is in that story of the prodigal son. That just having this faith that you know what my father his servants are fed better than this. I'm just going to go back and I'm going to ask to be a servant. uh and he didn't even get all the way there. He was afar off. The father was watching for him, was looking for him, and the moment that the father saw movement, he's like boom. And then the father does something that no self-respecting man would have done, and he ran. Because a distinguished man, they don't run. They walk everywhere. They're always in control. Homie bolted to go and get his
Yep.
boy back.
And he did it to a son who was walked out of a pig pen. So he's still covered in pig manure and dirt and gross and yuck. And he still embraced him, kissed him, and
You mean
pulled
I
him
don't
back
have
into
to?
the family. Like,
You mean I don't have to clean myself up before I come to Jesus?
you do not. Not at all. We would
Oh,
say
man.
that kind of works is a bad kind of work. That's
Yeah.
the bad works. Trying to fix it myself to be good enough for God, because that never works. But yeah, God, grossness. This is the only time that Luther's metaphor of snow-covered manure is helpful, because we show up as snow-covered manure, and then God turns us into, through grace,
Yeah.
the fullness of the image of Christ.
Yeah. Man, that's beautiful. Yeah, I think Paul says that it's God working in you both to will and to do. And the working there is, of course, that's the Latin version. The Greek is energies, right? Um, and so your will and your work are being energized by God. It's this synergy. Um,
Right.
and that makes a lot more sense of it. It's not God puppeting you, right? Like
No.
it's not the uh, I'm just going to cause you to do these things. And that kind of seems to be the gist of a lot of, well, what is it? Um, real faith will have all of these works. Faith that doesn't have works isn't real faith. And then you're sitting there trying to decide, do I have real faith? Like there's some sort
Mhm.
of quality to the faith, that this intangible quality that you're like, oh, do I have this real faith? Or am I just self-deceived? And so then you begin having anxiety about whether your faith is faithy enough. Um,
Mhm.
and and that can get into all sorts of spiraling, right?
Mhm.
So the thing that they thought would fix the problem only compounds it, uh, right?
Turns people into a neurotic mess.
Yes,
And that's why you hear so much of this conversation ultimately boils down to, am I going to heaven or not? Because we've turned ourselves into a neurotic mess.
yes,
And in the East, we're able to just be like, I get as far as I get, and God's grace will cover the rest. And when your view of grace is truncated and way too small, that's a very hard thing to put your trust in. But as I'm learning my view of mercy and my view of grace and my understanding of living in an incarnational existence, I don't have those worries anymore. Really, my worry is right now. Am I still making the free choice to participate? Because, like I said, God doesn't force us to do anything. Not in the Orthodox Church. In those other Protestant worlds, you're forced into anxiety and swallowing a whole bunch of stuff you don't want to get your Willy Wonka ticket to heaven. But in the Orthodox Church, God waits to respond, to be asked, and always gives us permission to take it out, and always gives us the gentleness to treat meet us where we are. And see, that's the whole point of this Greek term oikonomia. Like me, like with my knee right now. Normally in services, you stand for the gospel, you stand for the censer, you stand for the Eucharist. And with my knee, like I just can't. So the priest is like, no, 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 sit down. And I feel horrible the entire time because no, I want to be standing with everybody else. But that also not just is a grace for me, but it's a grace for everybody else, because I have to learn when somebody else is given an economia to not do something that I'm doing, instead of learning to, instead of being judgmental as why aren't they doing that? That moves me to compassion to pray for them. That whatever is not, that it allows me to show grace and mercy to them.
and it makes you have to be humble enough to
Mhm.
say, you know what, this is what was given to me
Yep.
by someone whose authority I'm under. And so even though
Mhm.
I don't want to, even though I don't like it, I would like to work through the pain in order to not be wrong, or not be different. I have to submit. um,
Yeah.
and in that submission, you're submitting to not only your elder, but in submitting to your elder, you're submitting to Christ, because
Right. And again, that stuff is not forced. It's all voluntary. And here's the thing, Shaun, that I think, because I had a lot of anxiety about this in the beginning, and I've heard this in various forms from our new people and my Protestant friends who, still wish that I would change my mind about all this. That, you're being forced into some of these things. And so, well, what if they tell you the wrong thing and you wind up, in a worse place than you were? So if I am choosing to do what my spiritual father gives me to do, like, okay, I show him my wounds and he's like, okay, here's the medicine. And that doesn't work. And I end up not being healed, or I end up even more injured than I was. In involuntary submission, who's responsible for that? Not me. My spiritual father is the one who bears the weight of that consequence before God, not me. And so it's just like there's a whole lot less anxiety there. Can I trust what he tells me? Yes. And if he tells me the wrong thing and I end up more injured because of it, that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to trust the spirit of the Holy Spirit. And this is where I think the truncated understanding of the Holy Spirit comes into play. because the Holy Spirit is there in those conversations, guarding what he says and guarding what I hear. And so if I, in good faith, follow what I'm told and voluntarily say, okay, I'll agree to that, I'm blameless in that situation. And so there's a whole lot less pressure, and the old pressure of I got to go in the closet with my Bible and figure it out on my own. And now all of a sudden, if I make mistakes because I do what I thought I read and then told, God told me, how do I know that for certain? But if that goes badly, I'm responsible for that. And that weight is on me. And in voluntary submission and obedience, that's not my weight. That's not my injury. That's not my responsibility. That is the responsibility of the person that I have been submitted to, because they are a representative. They are representing, iconing Christ for me. So I'm submitting and giving that to Christ. And ultimately that will be healed. So no, it's not forced. You're not forced to do anything against your will. And I'm not responsible if it goes wrong. So there's a lot less pressure there. And it's a lot gentler way to live. And yeah, we disagree. And, my clergy know me well enough by now to know that I might argue with them a little bit, or I may fuss about it a little bit. But ultimately, I'm learning that it just is easier path in my healing, because I just have to follow Christ's example. And if mistakes are made, that's not my wound to have to be accountable for. I just have to go and get healing for the wound of the mistake. But it's not. Does that make sense? Like it's just a whole lot less stressful way to be, because I don't have this mental spin out of all this other stuff that I used to have as a Protestant.
Yeah, it reminds me of, like in the military, if you are hurt during training by doing what you were told to do, it's a lot easier to explain and get the medical attention you need versus I was hurt because I refused to do what I was told to do. That's on me, right? So,
Yep.
and then that's going to be one where, yeah, that's your bad. You're dumb. Stop being dumb.
Yeah.
If you would have been hurt doing what you were supposed to do, you would have at least had an excuse. Uh,
Yeah.
well, I wanted to do this episode. And I know this is a little bit out of myths, and mysteries, or myths, mysteries, and majesty. It's a little bit out of our wheelhouse to do something that's theologically like this. But I've noticed, and I've noticed for a while, that there's a lot of people that are moving towards Orthodoxy. This kind of seems to be a I don't want to call it a fad or a trend because that seems to diminish it, but this seems to be like a movement that's happening. And in the wake of that, there's been a lot of ecclesial anxiety that has come up with people saying, well, they're looking at it, they're looking at the arguments, they're looking at the things. And I didn't want to do anything apologetics. I didn't want to do anything of, point for point, tit for tat. I just wanted to have a conversation with somebody who did move that way. And kind of not only bring it to the attention of people like, hey, this is what's happening, this is why, but also if they did have those anxieties, what the response from orthodoxy would be. Because I noticed that the people who were most hit with this anxiety, they're still looking at it through the lens of the Protestant. So they're saying, oh, I'm concerned that the Orthodox may be right, but then they're going to choose to look at it like a Protestant instead of, well, if the Orthodox are right, then I should look at it through their eyes and not have this ecclesial anxiety, because he's going to meet me where I'm at anyway. And that's not to say you won't end up there, but the anxiety, you could just lose that. Right? Like God is not limited to working under a certain administration. God, he has chosen that, hey, this is the way that you should go to get to where I'm going to send you. But if for no fault of your own, you end up on a different path, I'm still going to be with you. Um, and I thought that this is something that probably, I don't want to say it hasn't been done. Like I don't have an innovative bone in my body. I'm not saying it hasn't been done. I haven't seen a video that approached it from this perspective,
Mhm.
of, you know, just wanting to release the tensions that wasn't either polemical or apologetic in nature.
Mhm.
Uh, and so, that's the reason. That's the justification. Hopefully Nico doesn't take it down. Um,
He better not.
but if he does, it'll still be on your channel.
There you go. It'll still be there.
Yeah. Um, so, with that said, is there anything that you want to give to our audience, just as a final thought of, hey, if you could take one thing away from this conversation, it would be this? Or is there anything that you wanted to discuss that we didn't have an opportunity to in this 2 hours?
Mhm. I think, Shaun, that I would say that, what would I say? I would say that the first step to finding healing in relationship with Christ is to start to learn to be honest with yourself. And that's very hard. And there's a lot of noise between the arguments online with all of the Theo bros and ortho bros and, mad treads, slinging a lot of things around that get very confusing and hurtful and polarizing. And some people, and I will say this too, in that realm, yes, things have gotten heated and a bit out of control, but some people are stupidly stubborn and need confronted in a way that needs combativeness. And some people need that, but not everybody does, right? So if that's the thing that gets you to be honest with yourself, do it, proceed with caution. But ultimately, and you see on this, that it's a phenomenon that a lot of people, not just Orthodox, are talking about, this Protestant panic. What are all these people leaving for? Why are they leaving? Why are they going to Anglicanism and Lutheranism and Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism, high church, high liturgical, historical churches? Why? Maybe instead of getting defensive, sitting down and having conversations about, with the way that our society is now, and that we're seeing the collapse of materialism and the collapse of nominalism and the collapse of Neoplatonism and the exposing the Gnostic underroots of our epistemology. Maybe that has something to do with a cultural reset that goes back to, that meets that longing that we're not meeting. And, having some honest conversations. And maybe that's doing the brave thing and sneaking into the back of Vespers and just watching. Or, sitting down with somebody else at your church and being like, being honest. Why do I feel like I'm not really getting the healing that I need here? Or hosting at your Protestant church a roundtable conversation with high church clergy. My preference would be Orthodox, but I'm Orthodox, but, again, from all of what we said, Christ will show you where your healing goes. And being open to having some of those conversations, because there's one of the things that's beautiful about the Orthodox Church that I'm not aware of the other traditions, so I can't speak to this with any kind of, no, it would be speaking out of ignorance, so I'm not going to do that. But there has been and is a trend of entire churches joining the Orthodox Church. Entire congregations are deciding this is the way to go. And so whole groups are coming over. and maybe just, but it starts with sitting down one-on-one with people in honest conversation and sitting down in prayer and crying out to God, why am I not feeling like I'm getting anywhere where I'm at? Maybe where I'm at is fine and there's some brokenness I'm not aware of in myself. And start there. You don't have to drastically throw out everything and redecorate your entire house to look like an Orthodox temple on day one. Like, it starts with just honest conversations.
I really appreciate that. And I'm sure that our audience will benefit from that wisdom. Will you let us know again if they want to look you up and find out where you're at and what you're doing? Could you share with us not only your channel, but also the Substack that you were talking about?
Yeah, so if you go to my channel, it is When Deep Calls Deep and then a dash and an Amber. Because if you just search When Deep Calls Deep, you get some weird Margaret somebody song that I don't even know what that is. So, but on my channel, there's a list of all of the contexts where you can find me. Unfortunately, I'm on Twitter, but that's where a lot of collaboration, conversations and DMs happen over there. So I went and reinstated because I deleted it at one point, but I went and resurrected it again so I could have a way to contact collaborators. So you can find me there. I'm very rarely posting on there, but that's a way to private message me. You can go to my channel and it will have the link to my Facebook page and to my YouTube. My email address is on there, so you can get in touch with me that way. And to everybody that was watching on my channel, because we co-streamed this to my channel too, I would encourage you to come back and watch some of the content over here on 3M and like and subscribe some of their stuff. Let's give these guys a little bit of support, because Shaun and Nico are good friends. We like to give Nico a hard time, but Shaun and Nico are good friends. And especially if you like stuff that's out of the realm and a little bit weird, this is definitely the place to find out of the normal realm and a little bit weird. So, come over and give these guys a try. But yeah, and then if I can, for just a second, really quick, I've got some really cool stuff that's coming out. Tomorrow, we're filming part 2 of the Baruch series, and Spencer is joining Troy and I for that, which is going to be awesome. We're going to talk about wisdom. And then Tuesday, I've got a new friend, Father Ron, from the channel Remote Orthodoxy, coming to have a fantastic conversation about Genesis. You're going to love it. If you're into the book of Genesis, this is going to be, I'm so excited about this conversation. And then we'll be right after that filming part 3 of Baruch and the Incarnation. And we're going to get into how the apocryphal books definitely are necessary to understand the narrative and the Incarnation. And so we're really going to dig into that. And then coming a little bit later, my thesis advisor and mentor, Dr. Dillon, is going to be coming in to talk about her new book. So I'm going to get to interview her. That's going to be fantastic. It's just a really, really fun, deep, nerdy. So if you like deep, nerdy theological and Bible conversations, head over to my channel, because you're going to find a lot of really, really, really interesting stuff over there. So, but yeah. So for my audience, come check these guys out, especially if you like weird stuff about vampires and werewolves and all of that big craziness. There's some really good stuff over here. I enjoy listening to it. Sometimes I don't always comment, but I usually always am listening to stuff either later. I try to catch them live, but I don't always get to. But yeah, that's where people can find me.
Well, we always appreciate you coming and watching our stuff. I unfortunately don't know any of the upcoming stuff that Nico has prepared, because he's in Serbia right now, and this was kind of this is the end of the Saint Shaun takeover. So we will be returning to your regularly scheduled programming.
I have to say, this is probably, I think, Shaun, my favorite, because you sent me a message and like, I'm going to go rogue and I'm going to take over and go live. And I was like, I'm down.
That's so awesome.
I have a record of doing this. Is the second time because Tyler and I did a takeover of Cosmic Corner once, and you can go find.
I watched it live. I watched it live.
It was so funny. And Josh, when he got out, he was like, and I'll tell you a funny story about that. I mean, not that anybody cares, but it was hilarious. So I was talking to Tyler. We were working on collaborating on episodes that we had coming up, and I think Josh can correct me later if I'm wrong, but I think that we had been invited onto Cosmic Corner to talk about something. I don't even remember what. But Tyler was like, "Hey, you know what? Let's just take over Cosmic Corner. Josh is late. Let's just start." And no, he said something about Josh being late. I'm like, "Oh yeah, well we could just take over and start." And I learned a very valuable lesson about communicating with Tyler Fowler. You never say anything like that, because before I was ready, he hit start and went live without Joshua Davidson. And Joshua Davidson showed up a few minutes later, and he was like, and I had my camera off, and I was like, I'm just absolutely going to die because I never intended to take over Cosmic Corner. But I said the wrong thing to Tyler Fowler, and there it is, preserved forever on the internet until Josh has mercy on me and goes and deletes that episode, because it just, it was, oh, that was just like one of those like, oh, Lord have mercy, what did I just do? So this is my second channel to take over, so it's been kind of fun.
Yeah, so anybody who's part of our audience, you've heard of Cosmic Corner before. We've had Joshua Davidson from Cosmic Corner on. Do yourself a favor and go and like and follow Cosmic Corner. I've been on there a few times, so you will get to see my beautiful face. Also, Amber has been on there a few times. You've been on Cosmic Corner, right?
I've been on Cosmic Corner twice. I was on that takeover episode, and then I was on Troy's last episode on Cosmic Corner.
Yes.
When he took his break.
But you used to have your own segment on Faith Unaltered, right?
I had my own segment with Tyler Fowler, and then we also had Courtney and I had Hebrew Bible Breakdown, which all that stuff is still there. So yeah, go check that stuff out. If you really want to get into the Hebrew nerdiness, yeah, go check out that playlist, because it's also pretty epic.
Yeah, so we are way off script now. But
we didn't even have a script, so being off script
of course
is not even
have a script.
not even an accurate description. He's just like, we're gonna wing it. I'm down. Let's just do it. We'll wing it.
Yeah. So well, we're gonna go ahead and end the stream since we've been going for almost 2.5 hours. But I am going to just sign off. It's been mythical, exploring the mysteries of Christ's majesty.